On an October Saturday, hundreds came to celebrate the life of Norman Seay, who passed away in September at the age of 87. He was an important figure in St. Louis civil rights history, which really makes him an important figure in St. Louis history, period. He was fighting the fight when few others were, refusing to accept segregation in the city in which he was growing up.
Jackie Robinson, the baseball teams coming into the city of St. Louis, those black baseball players couldn't stay in the hotels.
Years before Dr. King's March on Washington, years before the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision, Norman Seay was participating in peaceful sit-ins in downtown restaurants that refused to serve black customers.
I always say Norman Seay has the longest civil rights resume of anyone I know.
The Missouri Historical Society's Gwendolyn Moore is an expert on the civil rights movement in St. Louis.
He was a founding member of CORE when he was 16 years old and participated, that was in 1948, participated in all of those early sit-ins that nobody knew about back then. I always tell people this was before, the Greensboro sit-ins in North Carolina that most people know about.
We would just walk up, go into the cafeteria area and take a seat. I remember 3 or 4 different places. We went to Sticks, Bear and Fuller. We stayed at that department store for approximately 18 months trying to get served. We were never served.
I remember when I was talking to Mr. Seay, he didn't think that they were that successful, but I think they were. I think you had successes. They might have been small successes, and it was incremental. But what you were doing for those 10 years ultimately led to a 1961 public accommodations law in the city of St. Louis. That would not have happened, I don't think, unless that small group of dedicated people were putting pressure on these eating facilities. So he was a member of CORE, he was a member of the NAACP, he was involved with the Urban League, of course he was involved in the Jefferson Bank demonstration.
CORE, the Committee of Racial Equality, began to picket the Jefferson Bank because it would not meet the demand to hire 4 black employees. Similar demands had been made of several banks and a chain of clothing stores. They said they were working with the Mayor's Fair Employment Commission and refused to meet CORE's demands. But only the bank at Jefferson and Washington was targeted for demonstrations. The management there was ready with an injunction prohibiting demonstrators from interfering with bank business, and at first they did just march outside. But late in the afternoon, some protesters entered the lobby and others followed.
It was the first time that we had had a major confrontation between the power structure, the in-group, the business community, and just the average African American.
After the demonstration ended, the police began rounding up the organizers, including Norman Seay and future U.S. Congressman William Clay. They were tried, convicted, fined, and sentenced to 3 months in prison.
The judge said, if you apologize, we'll let you out. No. He didn't apologize. Bill Clay didn't apologize. All of them didn't apologize. Some did, but he was one that would not compromise his principles.
The arrests and the sentences galvanized support for the cause, and the protests continued.
The demonstrations ended because the banking industry and other companies began employing African Americans. In fact, while we were in jail, companies were going out to the Urban League, the NAACP, to various social organizations, political organizations, and employing African Americans. And so that's how it ended.
And one of the things he told me is that he couldn't get a job in St. Louis because of his civil rights activity. He couldn't make a living because he was being blacklisted because of his civil rights activities. And that's how he wound up leaving St. Louis. I think it was for about 8 years. He got a job with the federal government. And then he finally came back, I think he said because his mother was ill. And I think by that time, maybe people weren't still holding that grudge against him because of his activism. So yeah, and I think this was the case of a lot of people who were active in the civil rights struggle, that they did sacrifice quite a lot. And I think people need to understand that people did sacrifice.
Norman Seay later became a member of the University of Missouri St. Louis administration, soft-spoken, distinguished, but as Chancellor Emeritus Blanche Toohill remembers, still fighting the fight.
And he would say to me, my goal is to get tenured slots for African American faculty that qualified. And that's what he did. And so over a period of, say, 15 or 20 years, we had 28 tenure track or tenured faculty. And that was really the work of Norman. And I think the society and UMSL is very pleased with that, because that's what had to happen.